Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to talk about some JavaScript rules we should follow. Before we start writing JavaScript, we need to know the basics of the language. Some of these are hard rules that define how the language itself works. Others are conventions that decide how we write JavaScript, so it's easier to read for ourselves and for others. Rule number 1. JavaScript is case sensitive. This means when you use your shift or caps lock keys, it really matters. Unlike in HTML and CSS, when you use uppercase and lowercase letters whenever you want, in JavaScript, however, the casing of the word matters. If, for example, you create a variable called character name with a capitalized N and then try to reference it with a lowercase n, JavaScript sees them as two completely different things and you get an error. This case sensitivity matters everywhere except coded strings of text. For example, you may have noticed we got the date from the browser in the previous video. We typed out date equals new date with a capitalized D. Well, if you try to do the same with a lowercase d, you get an error. That's because new date with a capitalized D calls a constructor, and new date with a lowercase d is nothing. Rule number 2. Speaking of uppercase and lowercase, the agreed upon naming convention for JavaScript is to use what's known as camelCase. That means we can concatenate or squish together words and separate them by capitalizing the first letter of each word. You'll see this in methods we used like getElement by tag name, and in variables I wrote like character name or Kermit the Frog and so on. You get the drift. The general rule is to start variable, function, and method names with a lowercase letter, classes and object names with a capitalized letter, and constants typically are all caps. Follow these naming conventions and your script will be consistent with what other developers are doing. Rule number 3. JavaScript does not care about whitespace, but you should. When we write JavaScript, we provide instructions in the form of statements. Each statement is a separate instruction. So, for example, create a variable, add a current date to the variable, output the current date as HTML inside the body element, etc. How exactly you lay out the document doesn't matter much to the browser. You can add as much or as little whitespace, that is actual space between lines and elements. The problem is if you don't do this consistently, your code will be really hard to read for humans, and we are humans, so this is important to us. Therefore, even though we don't have to, we add whitespace to keep our code human readable. Rule number 4. End each statement with a semicolon. Now, this one's a bit controversial. Technically, JavaScript doesn't care if you use semicolons or not, except for a few specific situations. But if you don't use them, your code will be very hard to read. So it's good practice to add semicolon at the end of each statement you write to keep your code structured. Now, in my opinion, code should be readable and maintainable, and semicolons help you do both of those things. Semicolons are a matter of opinion, so do whatever you feel is best for you. Rule number 5. Use comments every chance you get. Comments are strings of text you use in your code that are ignored by your browser. They're there for you to leave notes to yourself and other developers about your code. In JavaScript, you create a single line comment by starting the line with 2 forward slashes, and a multi-line comment starting with forward slash and asterisk, and ending your multi-line comment with asterisk and forward slash, just like in CSS. Use comments to explain to yourself and anyone who's looking at your code what's going on, so you can return to your code years later and still understand what you did back then. You'll see me use comments a lot throughout this course, and I encourage you to do the same. So that's it for this video, guys. Hope it was helpful. Like the video if you like it, consider subscribing to the channel, and if you have any questions, leave it out in the comment section and I will get back to you. Thank you so much.